The courtroom was suffocating with silence, the kind of silence that echoed in your ears, pressing on your chest, making it hard to breathe. The judge was perched on his high chair, his gavel poised in his hand, his eyes scanning over the legal documents before him. Everyone was waiting for the next step in the trial, their eyes fixed on the judge, their breaths held in anticipation. The tension was palpable, hanging in the air like a storm just waiting to break. But nothing could have prepared anyone for what came next. The door to the courtroom creaked open, breaking the heavy silence. A tiny figure stood in the doorway, a little girl, no older than 10. She was wearing a suit that looked far too big for her, the sleeves hanging down past her wrists, the pants dragging on the floor as she stepped inside. She clutched a small, leather briefcase in one hand, her fingers wrapped around it tightly, as if it was the most important thing in the world. For a moment, the room didn't react. Everyone was confused. Who was this child? Why was she here? She couldn't have been old enough to even understand the case, let alone represent someone in court. The judge's eyes narrowed as he looked at her, his brow furrowing. He didn't recognize her. Was she part of the family? The child of one of the lawyers? He glanced at the crowd, but no one seemed to know her either. "Excuse me," the judge called out, his voice deep and commanding. "What are you doing here? This is a courtroom, not a playroom." But the little girl didn't flinch. She stood tall, her small frame somehow giving off an air of confidence, as though she belonged there. She stepped forward, her gaze unwavering as she walked toward the front of the room. The crowd was watching her now, their eyes wide with curiosity. "I'm my dad's lawyer," she said clearly, her voice ringing through the room, cutting through the confusion like a knife. The judge blinked, his grip tightening around his gavel. He hadn't heard her correctly, had he? A lawyer. This child was claiming to be a lawyer. He scanned the room again, looking for anyone who might explain what was going on. But no one was saying a word. The little girl, completely undeterred, walked up to the podium. She placed the briefcase on the desk with a soft thud and opened it slowly, her tiny hands moving with surprising precision. She didn't look nervous. She didn't even seem scared. It was as though she had been here 100 times before, standing in front of a room full of strangers, ready to speak her mind. The judge cleared his throat, his voice now shaking ever so slightly. "Excuse me, young lady," he said, his tone softer but still full of authority. "You can't just walk in here and claim to be someone's lawyer. Where are your credentials? Who are you, really?" The little girl didn't hesitate. "I'm 10 years old," she said calmly, as if stating a simple fact. "I'm my dad's lawyer. He sent me here today to represent him." A ripple of shock passed through the courtroom. Some of the spectators whispered to each other, shaking their heads in disbelief. The judge could feel his heart rate quicken. What was going on? Was this some kind of joke? How could this little girl be a lawyer? This couldn't be real. He looked at her closely now, noticing the seriousness in her eyes, the way she held herself. There was something about her, something that made him pause. She wasn't just some child making a silly claim. She was standing there, unflinching, like she belonged in that position, like she had every right to be there. He couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt in his mind. Was this a joke, or was there more to this than met the eye? "Your father, he knows you're here?" the judge asked, his voice lower now, more cautious. The little girl nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "Yes, he knows. He's the one who sent me. He trusts me to represent him because I know the truth." The judge's mind was racing. He glanced at the court clerk, but the clerk was just as confused as he was. The whole room was filled with tension now, as everyone waited for the next move. The girl was standing there with such confidence, and the judge couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play here. "All right," the judge said, taking a deep breath and trying to steady his nerves. "If you're here to represent your father, then tell me why. Why should I allow a child to represent someone in a legal case? How could you possibly have the experience or the knowledge to handle such an important task?" The little girl's eyes narrowed slightly, but her expression remained calm. "Because I know the truth," she said firmly. "I know everything that happened. I have the evidence right here." She reached into the briefcase and pulled out a stack of neatly organized papers. The judge watched her every movement, unable to look away. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't nervous. In fact, she seemed completely in control of the situation, as if she had prepared for this moment her entire life. The crowd shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. No one knew what to make of this. Was this child for real? Could she actually be a lawyer? What evidence could she possibly have that could change the course of the trial? The little girl placed the papers on the desk in front of her, flipping through them with the precision of someone much older. She looked up at the judge, her gaze unwavering. "I'm here because my father is innocent," she said, her voice steady, "and I'm going to prove it." The room went completely silent. No one dared to speak. The judge stared at her, a mix of disbelief and confusion in his eyes. What was he supposed to do now? Could he really let this child speak on her father's behalf? Was there something he was missing? He looked at her papers, at the quiet determination in her eyes, and for the first time that day, he wondered if this might not be as simple as it seemed. There was something about this little girl that made him question everything. The girl straightened her back, looking at the judge with a calm authority that made him feel, just for a moment, as though she were the one in charge. The courtroom was still waiting for her next move, and no one knew what would happen next. Would she be able to prove her father's innocence? Would the judge allow a child to change the course of the trial? The air in the room felt charged now, like the calm before a storm. Whatever was coming next, it was going to be something none of them would ever forget. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. The tension in the air was so thick you could almost taste it. The little girl, no older than 10, stood before the judge, her small hands firmly gripping the podium, as if she were born to be there. The judge sat frozen in his chair, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. How could a child in double-digit speed here, claiming to represent someone in a court of law? Everyone in the room was staring at her, unsure of what to do, unsure if this was some kind of elaborate prank or a serious breach of protocol. The lawyers in the room exchanged uneasy glances, and the spectators in the gallery whispered to each other, their faces a mixture of confusion and disbelief. No one could have prepared for this moment. The little girl had just made a claim that no one had seen coming. The judge cleared his throat, his voice unsteady as he broke the silence that had fallen over the room. "Young lady, I need you to understand something. This is a courtroom, not a playground. You cannot simply walk in here and claim to be your father's lawyer without any credentials. Are you even aware of what you're saying?" The girl didn't flinch. She stood there with her shoulders squared, her eyes locked with his. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty in her gaze. It was as if she had been here 1,000 times before, representing people in ways that no one else could. She wasn't intimidated by the judge, or by the serious atmosphere of the courtroom. She was here for a reason, and that reason was as clear to her as the papers in front of her. "I know what I'm saying, Your Honor," she replied, her voice calm, collected. "I'm here because I have the proof. My father is innocent, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." The judge blinked, unable to comprehend what she was saying. She spoke with such conviction, such certainty. He had seen many cases, heard many arguments, but never anything like this. A child, representing someone in a case that could determine someone's future. What was going on? Was she telling the truth? How could he, or anyone in this room, possibly take her seriously? He glanced down at the papers in front of him, then back at the little girl. Her eyes, though small and young, held a depth that made him uneasy. She wasn't a typical child. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. She wasn't just standing there with the innocence of youth. She was standing there with the authority of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The judge shifted in his chair, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Let's start with the basics," he said, trying to regain control of the situation. "How can you be your father's lawyer? You're a child. You don't have the legal training, the qualifications, the experience." I've been studying law for years," the little girl interrupted. Her words were measured, confident. "My father taught me. He's been in and out of courts for as long as I can remember. I've learned everything I need to know to help him. This case is about more than just facts. It's about justice, and I know what's right." The judge opened his mouth to respond but paused, his mind racing. He had been a judge for over 20 years, seen hundreds of cases, but never one like this. How could a child know so much about the law? How could she stand there with such confidence, knowing so much about something so complicated? The questions were piling up, but one thing was clear. This was not a situation he could simply dismiss. "All right," the judge said, trying to steady his nerves. "I'll allow you to present your case, but I need you to understand that this is a serious matter. The law is not a game, and this court will not tolerate any foolishness." The little girl nodded, as if she had expected nothing less. "I understand, Your Honor," she said softly, "and I'm not here to play games." The crowd was silent, each person glued to the scene unfolding before them. What were they witnessing? A child, no more than 10, had just stepped into the role of a lawyer. She was acting with the kind of authority and confidence that was usually reserved for adults. And yet, she was just a little girl. The surreal quality of it all was almost too much to process. The judge turned his attention back to the papers the girl had placed on the podium. He picked them up slowly, scanning the pages one by one. They were neatly organized, meticulously, arranged as though they had been prepared by a seasoned attorney. But these were just papers. He needed more than this. He needed to know what was going on. Why was this child so certain? What was she about to reveal? As the judge began to review the evidence, the little girl remained standing at the podium, her eyes never leaving his. There was no fear in her gaze, only a quiet determination. She was here to win, and she knew she could. For the first time in his career, the judge felt a twinge of doubt. What if she was right? What if her father was innocent? The room waited in suspended silence as the judge flipped through the documents. The crowd held its breath. Everyone in the room was wondering the same thing. Could this little girl truly have the answers? Could she really change the course of this trial? It was a question that hung in the air unanswered. "I've reviewed your documents," the judge said, his voice steady but filled with a new sense of curiosity. "But just because you have paperwork doesn't mean your father is innocent. There's more to the law than just words on a page. You'll need more than this if you're going to prove anything." The little girl nodded once, her gaze unwavering. "I know, and I have more. The truth is not just in the papers, Your Honor. It's in what happened, in what's been hidden from everyone." The judge raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "What do you mean, what's been hidden?" The girl stepped forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that only the judge could hear. "I know the truth about the person who framed my father, and I know what they did to make him guilty in the eyes of the law. But it's all a lie, Your Honor, everything." The judge's heart skipped a beat. A lie? Who would go to such lengths to frame someone? What kind of person would do that? The questions flooded his mind, but he couldn't ask them all at once. He had to stay focused. He had to keep control of the courtroom. "Who are you accusing?" the judge asked, his voice tight with caution. The girl didn't hesitate. "The one who's sitting in this room right now," she said, her words sharp and clear. "The one who thought they could hide the truth. The one who thought they could fool everyone." The judge looked up sharply. The audience was still. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone was waiting for the revelation, waiting to see who the little girl was about to expose. And in that moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the bombshell to drop. "Who is it?" the judge asked again, his voice low and serious. The little girl met his gaze, her eyes filled with certainty. "It's you, Your Honor. You're the one who helped them cover it all up." The words echoed in the courtroom like a slap across the face. Every eye in the room snapped to the judge, their faces filled with shock, disbelief, and confusion. What was she saying? What did she mean? The judge's grip on his gavel tightened, his mind racing. Could this child really be accusing him? Could she know something that no one else did? He didn't know what to think, but one thing was certain. The game had changed. The stakes had just been raised to a level no one could have anticipated. The courtroom was still, the tension more intense than ever. The girl had just made her move, and now, no one knew what would happen next. The judge's hand trembled ever so slightly as he held the gavel, the weight of the room's silence pressing down on him. The little girl's words echoed in his mind, louder than anything he had ever heard before. "It's you, Your Honor. You're the one who helped them cover it all up." The accusation hung in the air like a threat, sharp and unyielding. How could this be happening? What was she talking about? The room felt suffocating, the walls seemingly closing in around him. He could feel the eyes of everyone on him, their judgment, their disbelief, their curiosity. But more than that, he could feel the weight of her gaze, the little girl who had just turned his world upside down with a single sentence. For a moment, the judge did nothing. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He was frozen in place, trying to process what had just been said, what he had just been accused of. He had been a judge for over 20 years, seen countless trials, and yet nothing had ever prepared him for this. A child, standing before him, accusing him of complicity in a crime. The audience was still, too stunned to speak. No one dared to break the silence, and the judge could hear his own heart pounding in his chest. His mind raced, but nothing made sense. Why would this child accuse him? What had he done to deserve such an accusation? He had spent his entire career upholding the law, ensuring that justice was served. Was she lying? Was she playing some sort of game? Finally, the judge cleared his throat, his voice strained and uncertain. What are you talking about? His voice cracked slightly, betraying the doubt and fear that had begun to seep into his mind. What do you mean by that? I'm just a judge. I don't. The girl stepped forward, cutting him off with a sharp, unwavering gaze. You know exactly what I mean, Your Honor, she said, her voice still calm but filled with authority. You helped them frame my father. You helped cover up the truth, and now you're trying to make everyone believe he's guilty. But it's all a lie. The judge's mind whirled, but his body was still, as if he were rooted to the spot. The girl's words felt like a slap in the face, and yet they were delivered with such quiet confidence that he couldn't dismiss them as the ramblings of a child. This wasn't just an accusation, it was a revelation. But a revelation about what? And about him. He was a judge. How could she possibly know something like that? He wanted to argue, to deny the accusation, but something in the girl's eyes stopped him. There was no fear there, no hesitation, only the certainty that she knew something he didn't, something he had never expected to come from a child. She was too composed, too confident, too certain, and that's what unsettled him the most. How could you possibly know that? The judge's voice was barely a whisper now. How could a child like you? Because I've been watching, she interrupted, her eyes flashing with a new intensity. I've been watching everything. I've been listening to every conversation, studying every detail, and I know that my father was set up. I know who did it, and I know that you helped them. The judge's mind raced even faster now. Who was this little girl? How could she possibly know what was going on behind the scenes? The thought of his involvement, of being accused of helping cover up a crime, was unfathomable to him. He had always prided himself on his integrity, on his commitment to the law. He had never done anything wrong, never crossed a line, but now, here she was, making him question everything. The little girl continued, her voice steady as she spoke. I know you helped them because I've seen the evidence. I know about the secret meetings, the phone calls, the things that were said in the shadows. I know that you were part of it. You might not think anyone saw, but I did. I saw it all. The judge's throat went dry. His pulse quickened, and a cold sweat began to form on the back of his neck. How could this be happening? How could a 10-year-old child have access to such information? Who was behind all of this? And why was she the one to expose it? I don't know what you think you're talking about, the judge said, his voice growing more defensive. There's nothing going on here. I've followed the law every step of the way. I've always been fair and impartial. You're making baseless accusations. The little girl didn't flinch. She was as calm and steady as ever. You can say that all you want, but the truth is out there. I have proof, all the evidence I need, to show that you're lying, that you're part of this whole thing. Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. Proof, evidence. Was she really telling the truth? Could she really have the information she claimed to have? The judge was suddenly filled with a sense of dread. The thought of a child being this certain, being this capable, made him question everything. Was she really just a child, or was she something more? The girl opened the briefcase she had been carrying and pulled out a stack of papers, each one meticulously organized. She laid them out on the podium, one by one, with a calm precision that only added to the sense of unease in the room. The judge's heart was pounding in his chest as he looked at the papers in front of him. Could this really be happening? Was this child about to reveal something that would shatter everything he had ever known? Without a word, the girl pointed to one of the documents. This is a transcript of a phone call you had with the prosecutor, she said. It's all right here. You were discussing my father's case, discussing how to ensure he was convicted. You were part of it, Your Honor. You were part of framing him. The judge's eyes widened as he looked at the document in front of him. His hands were shaking as he picked it up, his eyes scanning the words. The transcript was clear, undeniable. It was his voice. There was no mistake. The conversation was real. He was there, and his words told a story he had never intended to tell. The feeling of betrayal hit him like a freight train. How could this happen? How could he be involved in something like this? No, he whispered, his voice cracking with the weight of the revelation. This can't be. I didn't. But the little girl wasn't finished. She pushed another document forward, her eyes still locked on the judge. "And here's the meeting you had with the defense attorney. You were giving them advice on how to handle the case, how to make sure my father was convicted. You were supposed to be impartial, but you weren't. You were part of the plan all along." The judge staggered back, his mind reeling. The room felt like it was spinning, his vision blurring as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The little girl had just torn his entire world apart with a single glance, with a single accusation. How had she uncovered all of this? How had she known where to look, what to find, and why had he never seen it coming? "You can't deny it," the girl said softly, her voice unwavering. "I have all the proof I need, and now everyone will know the truth. My father didn't do this, you did." The room was completely still. The judge felt as though he were drowning in the weight of his own guilt, his own fear. He had been caught, and now there was no escaping the truth. The courtroom was filled with whispers, with people murmuring to each other in disbelief. The judge was no longer the one in control. The little girl had turned the entire case on its head, and there was no going back. The little girl didn't look away. She didn't show any sign of fear or hesitation. She was standing there, in front of the judge, in front of everyone, holding the truth in her hands, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop her. The judge swallowed hard, his throat dry, his mind spinning. What had he done? What was he going to do now? The courtroom held its breath. The judge's mind was spinning faster than he could process, each thought colliding into the next, like an endless series of train wrecks. His gaze remained fixed on the little girl standing confidently at the front of the room, as though she had just walked through fire and emerged unscathed. How could this be happening? Just a child had exposed him, had forced him to confront something he never imagined he'd face. The weight of the accusation, the cold certainty in her voice, made his legs feel weak. He hadn't expected this, not in a million years. The courtroom was silent, so silent that the judge could hear the sound of his own breath, shallow and quick. It was as if the air itself had stopped moving, and the world outside had ceased to exist. The audience, the lawyers, everyone in that room had been swept up in the storm of this child's words, unsure of what to believe, unsure of what was real. The little girl's confidence was unlike anything the judge had ever witnessed before. She wasn't trembling, she wasn't nervous. She stood tall, holding the truth in her small hands as though it were a weapon, as though it were the most natural thing in the world for her to stand there and expose him for who he truly was. The judge shook his head, trying to shake off the dizziness that had begun to settle in. He looked at the papers in front of him, trying to make sense of them, but the words blurred together. They were his words, undeniable and clear. His mind tried to rationalize it, to explain it away, but nothing made sense. He couldn't deny it. There was no escape from the truth that the little girl had uncovered, and now everyone in that room knew it. The room was waiting. The judge could feel their eyes on him, their anticipation, their disbelief. He needed to say something, anything, to stop the spiral he was falling into. He forced his voice to sound steady, though it cracked at the edges. This is absurd, the judge managed, but his voice faltered. The words felt hollow, like they were slipping out of his mouth and into the abyss. This isn't what it looks like. You must be mistaken. I haven't done anything wrong." The little girl didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed locked on his, and for a moment it felt like she was staring right through him. She knew what he had done, and there was nothing left for him to say, nothing left for him to deny. The truth had already been laid bare, and there was no hiding from it now. "I'm not mistaken, Your Honor," the girl said softly, but her words carried the weight of 1,000 truths. "The truth is right in front of you, and now you're going to have to face it." The judge closed his eyes, trying to block out the noise of his own thoughts, trying to regain control of the situation, but it was slipping through his fingers, fast. He had spent so many years in the courtroom, so many years doling out judgments, making decisions, thinking he was the one in charge. But now, standing before this little girl, he realized just how powerless he truly was. He opened his eyes again, looking at the girl, searching for any sign that this was some kind of sick joke, but there was no sign of humor in her eyes. There was no trickery, no deception, just raw, unwavering certainty. "What do you want from me?" the judge asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you expect me to do now?" The girl took a step forward, the sound of her small feet echoing in the stillness of the room. "I want you to tell the truth, Your Honor," she said. her voice firm and unyielding. "I want you to admit what you did. I want you to stop pretending that you're the one upholding justice when all you've done is cover up a crime." The judge's chest tightened. He wanted to scream, to shout that this was all a misunderstanding, that he was innocent, that he had been tricked, but the words wouldn't come. He could feel the room closing in on him, the walls pressing in like they were made of concrete. He was suffocating, and the only thing that could save him was the truth, the one thing he had tried so hard to bury. The little girl continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I've seen the proof. I've seen the documents, the phone calls, the meetings. I know what happened. I know what you did to my father." The judge's hands clenched into fists. The anger bubbled up inside him, but it was quickly followed by fear. How could he fight this? How could he defend himself against a child who had all the evidence, all the proof, and yet no one seemed to care? His whole life, his whole career, had just been called into question by a little girl who had somehow uncovered everything he had tried to hide. "You can't just accuse me like this," the judge said, his voice rising with frustration. "You can't just come in here and say whatever you want. You have no idea what you're talking about." But the girl didn't back down. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She was unshaken, as though she knew the outcome before the trial had even begun. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," she said calmly. "I know because I've spent my whole life watching my father suffer because of you. I know because I've spent years studying everything, listening, learning, and now it's time for you to face the consequences." The judge stared at her, his mind in a frenzy. How could this be happening? How had she discovered all of this? What had she seen? And how had she pieced it together? There were so many questions, so many things that didn't make sense. But one thing was becoming painfully clear. The little girl knew more than he ever thought possible. She knew the truth, and now it was out there for everyone to see. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was trapped, caught in a web of his own making. The little girl had done what he couldn't. She had seen through the lies, seen through the corruption, and now she was holding him accountable for it. He wanted to run. He wanted to escape, to deny everything, to hide from the truth. But there was no escape now. The truth had a way of finding its way to the surface, no matter how deep you buried it. The girl stepped forward again, her small figure casting a long shadow in the courtroom. "You can't keep pretending, Your Honor," she said softly, but her words cut through the tension like a knife. "You can't keep pretending that you're the one in control when all you've done is hurt people. All you've done is hide behind the law and use it to your advantage." The judge looked around the courtroom, his eyes darting from one face to the next. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if they were all waiting for him to break, waiting for him to admit what he had done. But he couldn't. He couldn't bring himself to do it. He had spent his whole life believing in the law, in justice, and now he had to face the truth that he had failed both. For the first time in his career, the judge didn't know what to do. He had always been the one in control, always been the one to make the decisions, to deliver the verdict. But now, in front of this little girl, he was powerless. He was nothing more than a man who had been caught, a man who had lost everything. Girl's voice broke through his thoughts again. "You've had the power, Your Honor. You've had the power to decide who is guilty and who is innocent. But today, I'm taking that power back. Today, I'm going to make sure you face the truth." The room was silent again, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. And for the first time in his life, the judge realized that the truth had a way of coming out, no matter how hard you tried to bury it. The little girl was standing there, looking at him, waiting for him to say something, anything. But the judge had nothing left to say. The truth was out. And now, it was time to face the consequences. The courtroom was a battleground of uncertainty. The judge, once a pillar of authority, now felt like a prisoner in his own domain. The little girl, no older than 10, had done what no one had thought possible. She had shaken the foundations of the law itself. Her accusations were like sharp daggers, cutting through years of false security, exposing the truth that the judge had buried deep within himself. He had always believed in the law, trusted it to uphold justice. But now, standing before this child, he realized just how fragile that belief had been. He couldn't escape it. There was no running from the truth she had unearthed. He had tried to keep his composure, to deny what she had said, but the evidence was undeniable. The transcripts, the meetings, the conversations, it was all laid out in front of him, and it all pointed to one thing. his complicity in a crime he had never thought he would be caught in. The crowd in the courtroom had grown restless, their whispers growing louder as they waited for the judge's response. He could feel the weight of their eyes, the pressure mounting as the little girl stood there, unwavering. She had done what no adult, no lawyer, no one else could do. She had revealed the hidden truths that had been lurking in the shadows, and now she was waiting for him to confess. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady but firm, "you can keep pretending all you want, but the truth is already out. It's in front of you, it's in those papers. You can't hide from it anymore." The judge's eyes flicked to the documents she had laid out in front of him. Each page seemed to burn with the truth that he had tried so desperately to bury. He had spent years carefully crafting his image as a fair and just judge, never once thinking that someone would see through the layers of deception. But this little girl, this child, had done it. She had seen past the facade, past the lies, and had uncovered everything. The room was still, as if the very air itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. The judge's fingers hovered over the papers, unsure of what to do with them. He had read them before, but now, seeing them through the eyes of this little girl, they felt like a weight that was too heavy to bear. He had been a part of something so much darker than he had ever imagined. How had he let it get this far? How had he allowed himself to become so entangled in lies and betrayal? "You need to understand," the judge said, his voice shaky, trying to find some kind of justification, some kind of escape. I didn't know it would go this far. I thought I was just following orders. I thought I was doing the right thing." The little girl tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing in silent judgment. "You're telling me you didn't know?" she asked, her voice carrying an edge that made everyone in the room shiver. "You're telling me that you, a judge, didn't know what was going on right under your nose? You didn't know that my father was being framed? You didn't know that you were helping to cover it all up?" The judge swallowed hard. He didn't know what to say. The truth was, he had known. He had known all along, deep down in the pit of his stomach, that something wasn't right. But he had turned a blind eye, convinced himself that it was all just part of the system, part of the job. And now, standing before this little girl, he realized how foolish he had been. "Your Honor," she continued, her voice unrelenting, "you can't keep pretending anymore. You can't keep pretending that you're the one who upholds justice when you've been a part of the injustice all along." The judge's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to defend himself, to explain, to make the world right again, but there was no explanation that could undo what had been done. There was no way to take back the damage he had caused. The little girl was right. The truth was out. The damage had already been done, and now there was no escape from it. The judge's gaze fell to the papers in front of him, and for the first time in his life, he didn't see a way out. He had always prided himself on his ability to control the courtroom, to maintain order, to make decisions that would impact lives for the better. But now, he was the one who was trapped in the web of his own lies, trapped by the child, who had exposed him for what he truly was. The little girl took a step closer to the judge, her small form casting a long shadow in the dimly lit courtroom. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough to force the judge to face the truth. She was standing there, the embodiment of everything he had failed to protect, everything he had allowed to slip through his fingers. "I know it's hard to admit," the little girl said quietly, "but you have to. You have to admit it. You have to say it out loud, or nothing will change." The judge's chest tightened as he struggled to breathe. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one crashing into the other. He wanted to fight back, to deny it all, but he couldn't. The evidence was right in front of him. The truth was staring him in the face, and there was no denying it. He looked up at the little girl, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and regret. He could see it now how blind he had been, how he had let his own ambition cloud his judgment. He had been so focused on maintaining his position, on protecting his reputation, that he had lost sight of what truly mattered. Justice, fairness, truth. The room was still, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone in the courtroom. It felt as though time had stopped, as though they were all waiting for the same thing, for the judge to admit the truth, to say the words that would change everything. The judge took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he reached for the gavel. He lifted it, but he didn't strike it. He didn't need to. The courtroom was silent, waiting for him to speak. "I am guilty," the judge said, his voice barely a whisper, but it echoed through the room with a weight that no one could ignore. "I helped them. I helped cover it all up. I failed. I failed my duty as a judge, and I failed the people I swore to protect." The words hung in the air like a bombshell, and the courtroom erupted in shock. Gasps, whispers, and murmurs filled the room, but the judge couldn't hear any of it. He was too focused on the little girl, standing before him with a look of quiet satisfaction. She had done it. She had forced him to face the truth, and now there was no turning back. "I'm sorry," the judge whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm so sorry." The little girl didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her mission had been accomplished. The truth had come to light, and the judge was no longer the one in control. He had been exposed, his secrets laid bare for everyone to see, and now there was nothing left to do but face the consequences of his actions. The room was still, and for the first time, the judge felt what it was like to be powerless. The little girl had taken the power from him, and he knew there was no way to get it back. The truth had won, and there was nothing he could do to change that. The judge sat motionless, the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. The courtroom had fallen into a stunned silence after his confession, the words hanging in the air like an ominous cloud that would never dissipate. He had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable in his life. His career, his reputation, everything he had built over the years had come crumbling down in an instant, destroyed by the very person he had least expected, a 10-year-old child. The room was filled with an electric tension, the murmurs of disbelief that had followed his admission slowly dying down. Everyone in the courtroom had heard him. They had heard the judge, the one who had always been a symbol of authority and justice, admit to his own guilt. His heart pounded in his chest, the reality of what he had done crashing over him in waves. The truth had come out, and there was no running from it now. The little girl, the one who had exposed him, stood still at the front of the room, her expression unchanging. She didn't show any signs of satisfaction or gloating. There was no joy in her face, no smile of victory. Instead, she seemed calm, almost serene, as though this had been the plan all along. She had never once wavered in her conviction, never once second-guessed herself. She had known the truth all along, and now the world knew it too. The judge's eyes slowly turned toward her, his gaze filled with a mixture of guilt and awe. How had she done it? How had she known? How had this child, with no legal training, no experience in the court system, managed to see through everything he had hidden so well? She had walked into this courtroom, a mere child, and in the span of a few hours, she had dismantled everything he had worked for, everything he had believed in. "How?" the judge whispered, barely able to speak the word. "How did you know?" The little girl didn't answer right away. She stood there, her gaze steady, her small hands folded in front of her, as if she were waiting for him to come to terms with it himself. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but filled with an authority that belied her age. "I knew because I've always known," she said simply. "I've watched everything, listened to every conversation, paid attention to every detail. It wasn't hard to put the pieces together. You were too careful, too secretive, and that's how I knew. I could see it, all the lies, the deceit, the betrayal." The judge's heart sank at her words. She wasn't just a child, she was a force of nature. She had seen through his layers of protection, his careful facade, and she had found the truth. And now, it was all laid bare, exposed for the world to see. He had spent years hiding his involvement in the case, hiding his guilt, but this little girl had done what no one else had been able to do. She had torn down the walls he had so carefully constructed, and now, there was no escape. "What now?" the judge asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. He didn't know what to do next, didn't know where to go from here. He had admitted his guilt, but what did that mean? What were the consequences of his actions? He had always been in control, always made the decisions. But now, it was as if the tables had turned. The little girl had all the power, and he was the one who was powerless. The girl took a step forward, her small figure seeming to grow larger in the judge's eyes. She didn't say a word, but her presence was enough. She was a reminder of everything he had done wrong, everything he had hidden from the world, and now, she was the one who would decide what came next. The judge's gaze dropped to the floor, his mind racing as he tried to process the consequences of what had just happened. He had always believed that he was untouchable, that his position in the courtroom made him above reproach. But he had been wrong. He had been so wrong. The truth had found him, and it had come in the form of a little girl who had shown him that no one, no matter their power, was immune to justice. The little girl spoke again, her voice clear and calm. "It's over, Your Honor. You've confessed. The truth is out. And now, you'll have to face the consequences." The judge's heart skipped a beat. The consequences. He had never stopped to think about what would happen once the truth came out. He had never considered what would happen to him once his role in the cover-up was revealed. He had been so focused on protecting his position, on hiding his guilt, that he had never stopped to think about the damage it would cause once everything was laid bare. "What happens now?" the judge asked, his voice shaking. "What will happen to me?" The girl's expression softened, but her gaze remained unwavering. "That's not for me to decide," she said quietly. "But you've lost everything. Your career, your reputation, your trust, everything you built is gone. And now, you'll have to live with the consequences of your actions." The judge closed his eyes, the weight of her words sinking in. He had lost everything. He had sacrificed his integrity, his honor, for the sake of power, for the sake of maintaining control. And now, it was all slipping away from him. The little girl had taken everything he had worked for and exposed it for the world to see. There was no going back now. The courtroom had become a reflection of the judge's own despair. The walls seemed to close in around him, the air growing heavier with each passing moment. He had been a part of something so much bigger than himself, something that had torn his world apart. And now, there was nothing left but the truth. There was nothing left but the consequences. The little girl turned to face the audience, her voice rising just enough for everyone in the room to hear. "This is what happens when we allow people in power to hide the truth," she said, her words carrying the weight of a lesson learned. "This is what happens when we let the guilty go free while the innocent suffer. We all have a responsibility to seek justice, no matter who we are or what position we hold. And if we don't, we end up like him, caught in the lies we've built around ourselves." Her words struck a chord with the audience, and for the first time since the trial began, there was a sense of unity in the room. The people who had once been passive observers were now fully engaged, fully aware of the stakes. The little girl had shown them the truth, had revealed the lies they had all been blind to. And now, they were all part of the story. The judge, his head bowed in shame, knew that he would never be able to undo the damage he had caused. He had spent his life trying to uphold the law, trying to serve justice, but in the end, it had all been a lie. He had betrayed everything he stood for, and now, there was no escape from the consequences. The little girl turned back to him, her gaze steady and calm. "You'll have to face what you've done," she said, her voice soft, but filled with a quiet power. "But know this, the truth will always come to light, no matter how hard we try to hide it. And when it does, there's no going back." With that, she turned and walked out of the courtroom, leaving behind a judge who had been stripped of everything he once held dear. The room was still, the weight of the moment hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. The judge sat there, motionless, as the consequences of his actions finally settled over him. There was no escaping the truth, and in the end, the truth was all that mattered. For the little girl, the journey was just beginning. She had taken down the man who had betrayed her father, but there were more battles to fight, more truths to uncover. She had proven that no one was above the law, no one was untouchable, and she would continue to fight for justice, no matter the cost. As she left the courtroom, she didn't look back. She had already won. The judge had lost everything, and the truth, in the end, had triumphed. The end.